You should be all set.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. We have all 9 members present, so I will go ahead and call to order this regular Board of Education meeting for Monday, August 23rd. And if we can all start by taking everybody off mute and joining me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic
for which it
stands, one
one
nation, under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty
liberty
and justice.
and justice for all.
Thank you all. So I'll start with a very brief chairman's report in light of some things that have occurred, not only locally in towns near us, but also nationwide. We do have a lot of difficult conversations coming our way over the next couple of months. Tonight, we'll be talking about masks, vaccinations, remote versus hybrid learning. Upcoming sessions will have discussions around diversity, equity, inclusion, open choice. Not necessarily on any agenda at the moment, but I know on some people's minds are ideas around critical race theory and bell time. So I just want to reiterate to everyone that civility is important. Not only not talking to the 9 board members here, I'm talking to the public as well. Whenever we discuss these topics, although they can be fraught, it's important that civility reigns. Raising voices, interrupting others, any other uncivil acts are really bullying and will not be tolerated by this board. It's not okay in our schools. It's not okay in board meetings. I just want to let that go out there. And again, I'm not talking just to our board members, I'm talking to the public. And I don't expect any kind of issues here in Ridgefield, but there have been some serious altercations in other towns. So I just want to put that out there. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. DeSilva.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for those words, and good evening, everyone. I'm excited for tonight's presentation, in particular around extended school year and bridge. And you can see a lot of faces around the Zoom tonight, and that's because we've had a lot of contributions from a lot of different folks. So I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Just a few updates. I know folks do read my Friday communications, if not on Friday at some point. It's been an exciting week and a half or so. We had our administrators return early last week for a retreat. Big thank you to Corey Gillette and Dr. Hanaway, who did a really great job of balancing heavy content legislation with a lot of fun and joy, and really embracing what we hope happens in our schools on August 30th and the 31st. So well done on behalf of Corey and Liz. Similarly, hard at work for our new teachers. We had new teacher orientation last Thursday, Friday. We were joined by Tina and Sean, really sincere, genuine words to our new teachers. And I can tell you for sure, and my colleagues can attest to it, our teachers were moved by the real thought and care that came from our board members and our first selectman, who actually joins us at every new teacher orientation. And I think this doesn't surprise anyone, but our first selectman just beams with pride whenever he talks about Ridgefield. And I think our teachers really felt a sense of how fortunate they are to join this community. And similarly, I think anyone who spent any time with our new teachers knows how lucky we are to have them join our community as well. They were actually hard at work getting their classrooms ready today in each of their buildings. So I'm thankful that the weather held out. On Wednesday, our board chair, along with hopefully any board member that's available, will join our faculty for convocation. Again, a special day prepared. We're actually going to have 2 so that we can reduce the density during convocation. I think I'll probably be better the second time around, but hopefully I'll be just as well prepared for the first time. But we're looking forward to that on Wednesday morning. And we're hitting the ground running for sure. Our faculty will have a few very busy days. They're actually in district tomorrow, setting up their spaces. So looking forward to that. Our children, both the smalls and the bigs, will be joining us on August 30th, K-9, and then grades 10 through 12 will join us on the 31st. Looking forward to that. Dawn and Rick, and alongside First Student, have their buses on the roads beginning tomorrow, trying to track those routes so that there's no delay, although I would just say this, it's likely that there will be on those opening days, but I know that they're going to do the best that they can to really get to know the routes so that we can be as efficient as possible. The board will see a staffing report later tonight. You'll see that we've had a lot of changes, a lot of new faces coming our way, and we are still in the process of hiring. So if you can believe it, even now on August 23rd, we were still interviewing teachers today. We expect to do that tomorrow and probably into the coming days. So it is certainly busy at Central Services, and not to mention Joe and his department getting our buildings in prime shape for our students' return. We've done a lot of work around the alternative high school and the space in our 18 to 22 program, a lot of in-house work. And so we're really proud of how much we've been able to get done around our facilities. So very much looking forward to our kids' return on the 30th and 31st. And I don't have a single doubt that it's going to be a joyful and exciting first couple of days. That's it, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Next up, committee chairs. I know we had a budget and finance committee meeting last week. Ken, you want to bring us through that?
So last week we had a committee meeting for the finance committee where we talked about the financials as of June 30th and received a catch up or sort of a summary of the year-end transfers and where we sat as of that date. And that's it. We'll be talking about a lot of those numbers later this evening.
Great, thanks. No other committees met this past week, correct?
I've got one, Jonathan.
We do have some liaison reports though, Sean?
Yeah. Yep.
Great.
Ridgefield Prevention Council is holding a first annual National Recovery Month vigil on September 16th in Ballard Park between 7 and 8:30 p.m. And would like to invite all the board members and the public at large to be there.
What was the date again, Sean?
September 16th,
Great, thank you.
7 o'clock.
Any other liaison reports for tonight?
Kathleen.
Kathleen?
Hi. Last I think Thursday, I met with the Energy Task Force. They are such a hardworking group. Anyway, we were able to FaceTime, I guess, or Zoom with Kate from the Montpelier, Vermont Task Force for Net Zero by 2030. And it was interesting just talking to her about what's happening. Although it's a capital city, it only has 7,000 people. So it was interesting speaking with her. They talked mainly to us about how they have some revolving loan funds and matching money from the state and talking about net zero funds and all the projects they're doing. Not much of it related to schools because in some ways they don't have the liaison with the schools like we do with myself and particularly Joe Moritz. So, but anyway, it was really heartening to listen to what they're doing and gave us ideas about, and basically our team was figuring out what do we want to ask for to meet our energy goals and how can we get this money? Is there any COVID money? Is there any other kinds of state money, et cetera? And it was just nice talking to another community about this goal to, to reduce energy. But thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Any other liaisons for tonight? No? Okay, we can move right on to the approval of minutes, starting with July 6th. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of July 6, 2021.
Do I have a second? Kathleen, okay. Any comments or adjustments to the July 6th minutes? Nora?
So just one thing on this one, on the third line down in the first paragraph, where it says RPS to provide a more thorough, and it should be understanding.
Agreed. Anything else on these minutes? Should we attach the letter to these minutes as well? Anyone?
Perhaps, but it's almost moot, but I mean, it does give clarity.
Right, and that's my thought. We don't have to adjust the minutes as long as the minutes are posted with the letter as an attachment on the website. Any other comments on the July 6th? Being none, all those in favor of approving? Let's see, 8. All those opposed? Abstaining? 1 abstention. Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the July 21st minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of July 21st, 2021.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay, great. Comments or corrections on the July 21st minutes? Nope, there being none, all those in favor of approving, please raise your hands. Seven, 4. Any opposed? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions, 7 approved, 2 abstain. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the August 9th minutes. Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of August 9th, 2021.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Tina. Comments, corrections on the August 9th minutes? Rachel.
I think under item 3, approval of minutes, the last 2 paragraphs, I think we need to strike the one before, because there's 2 June 28th, 2021. I think the second one is correct. The 603.
Versus 702, you're right. Okay, so that paragraph is removed. Anyone else? Kathleen, and then Nora.
On the page 2, item 4, discussion of possible action items. Under A, it starts with, in the 3rd line, presentation of full report on file, and it keeps going on. There's no end to the parentheses, sorry.
Close paren on line 3 of item 4A.
Yeah, and I think it should probably be after file, but I'm not sure because I wasn't the writer, but it looks like that might be it.
Okay, I agree. Anybody else? Nora?
So under item 3 for approval of minutes, I don't know, but for each one of the paragraphs on the first line where it says approve the minutes of the May 24th, 2021, I think after each one of those dates, there should be the word meeting.
Meeting. Yes, it certainly should be on all 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs that are going to remain. Okay.
Yep.
Any other corrections or comments on the August 9th minutes? All those in favor of approving as amended, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you all very much. Okay, now we can move on to the good stuff, discussion and possible action items, starting with report on ESY and Summer Bridge.
All right, so in just a moment, I'm actually going to turn this over to Dr. Hanaway and Ms. Gillette, who have their colleagues here with them, and I'll allow them to introduce each one of them and the work that they've done in isolation and in collaboration with one another. And what we said to you in June is we were going to share out how Bridge went, what we saw there, because obviously it was different than ESY. But this year we have a great opportunity not only to share out Bridge and ESY, but really the partnership that happened between the two of them. There's a lot of folks on here, and again, I'll leave it to Corey and Liz to introduce each one of them, but I can tell you for sure that our theme of superheroes this summer started at the top, and they're all here on this line, very proud of the work that they've done on behalf of kids. Not easy to turn something like this literally around in just, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. And they did that in partnership with a lot of other people that are on this line and not on this line. That includes building principals, facilities, the business department. A lot of folks came together and didn't let up. So I'm going to start off with Dr. Hanaway, who's going to introduce Dr. Shoa.
Thank you, Susie. Good evening. So I am really excited to introduce Tony and have him share the work that happened during extended school year this summer, and in particular to talk about the first year in which we ran an in-house Best Buddies program through our extended school year, which was a wild success. I would be remiss not take a moment to thank Tony for the unbelievable, tremendous amount of work to run what is essentially, and Corey can talk about it a bit more with Bridge, a pop-up school. We kind of liken it to a kiosk at the mall, but in the summer, a full-blown school. You know, the creativity, the ingenuity that he showed, and this work began last November. So it is a long haul. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony, the Assistant Director of Special Education, to walk us through the program for this past summer.
Thanks, Liz. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to make this presentation to you all because it is it's a labor of love. Certainly, you know, it's a pop-up pair of schools, and it's not just an enormous effort on me and Liz's part, but especially this summer we had over 120 employees working towards making it a successful summer for all of our students that were involved. So to each and every one of them, especially, thank you for helping make it happen. So we'll start with this slide and just introducing not only extended school year, but Best Buddies as well, which we'd never done before. And I'll get a little bit into why Best Buddies came around and how in a couple of slides. But going on to the next slide, just a quick splash page to highlight one of those beautiful moments that comes from a program like this in Best Buddies, where you just get such a salient example of why we do what we do, right? And just a moment of sharing some cars on the sidewalk is really goes so far to achieving the social skills that we had designed this program to do. All right, so moving right on. For those on video and for those watching at home, what is extended school year? What is ESY? So the extended school year is under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, intended to individualize the students program, right? That the I in IEP is for individualized, and that's to say that the student services should meet their needs as they're presented. So the state of Connecticut gives us a little bit about eligibility for those services because it's outside of the regular school year. So that eligibility can be due to a number of factors, the nature and severity of a student's disability, how they recoup or need recoupment time or regress potentially between breaks in instruction, have behavioral needs or independent needs, or other special circumstances. So for students who are eligible, what we do offer in Richfield are services for any of our students who have an IEP all the way from age 3 to age 22, as it relates to their needs and if their planning and placement team determines it's necessary and for what specific service. Those services can be any part of their IEP that are determined necessary to continue into the summer for any of those factors that I mentioned earlier, including but not limited to special education, speech and language services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychological services, board certified behavior analyst consultation, nursing services, et cetera. Our programs typically last 4 weeks, but they can go to as many as 6 weeks, depending on the intensity of the need for each of our students that are recommended for it. All right, so this next slide shows the 3 major types of programs that we've offered every summer. Itinerant, services are really individual services that are scheduled as one-offs with individual providers for students who really just need their goals and objectives targeted for reading, math, writing, or any of the related services that I've mentioned before, and typically last for 4 weeks, usually about 45 minutes a session. The academy program is the bulk of our program, right? Most of the kids who are recommended for ESY attend the academy, and the academy is a 3-hour morning program that's reading, writing, and math, almost like a typical day in a school, right? The kids come in as a cohort, as a section by grade level, and one teacher will teach them reading, writing, and math. Usually, little breaks. They'll go out on a quick recess run or do other sort of fun morning meeting things, and it really does echo a typical morning in a classroom. Some students are recommended for that for 3 days a week, some for 5 days a week, and that lasts for 4 weeks in the summer. Last but not least is one of my other babies, and that's RISE, the Ridgefield Intensive Special Education Program, and that's a 5-hour-a-day program, 5 days a week, and that's the interdisciplinary model with the board-certified behavior analyst and the special ed teacher running a classroom in consultation with our related services, working on all those functional communication, behavioral, and academic needs of those students. And that can be anywhere between 4 weeks and 6 weeks, and also can entail community skills, vocational skills, and other independent skills as deemed necessary under the student's IEP. All right, and so historically, and you'll see on the last bullet on the left side, we've typically, with the Academy and RISE, had a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, and Mike Flynn has been just the most wonderful collaborator with us in the last, even before I came into district, with us on designing and implementing a social skills program at Boys and Girls Club that's completely embedded with our kids and staff, learning along their typical peers or non-disabled peers in a camp style setting, which has just been a fantastic thing to see. Logistically, it's always been a challenge because we have to bust their half day and we have to send our own staff, and the logistical piece of the parking and all that has always been a challenge. But Mike has been, like I said, just a wonderful partner in making it work and being a success for our kids. In the last couple of years, we were on the verge of, instead of doing a half day afternoon program, shifting to a half summer program to get our kids even more embedded and following the Boys and Girls Club schedule from morning to afternoon instead of the half day, so that they could be even more fully included alongside their non-disabled peers in that schedule and in those activities, and really forge those friendships that come from the social skills services that are targeted for that purpose. All right, so jumping on to what came next, we can go to the next slide, was COVID, right? And we had a rough go with making sure that we could meet all the services that we'd originally intended to. The Connecticut Bureau of Special Ed had advised us to use the extended school year services as a method or an avenue for recovering some of the, we'll say, differences in our learning models this year and similar to last year. Due to that, we had quite a bit more recommendations from the IEPs for kids to attend summer. So you see in that second bullet, our academy sections grew, as well as our RISE sections. Although we did see similar levels of itinerant services, which are those one-off services recommended. Similar to years past, we landed at Barlow Mountain and Scotts Ridge, and just a shout out to Principal Becky Loss and Sarah Wiersman at Barlow, and administrators Tim Salem and Lisa Fries at Scotts Ridge for hosting us again, yet again. And there's a reason for that. It's not just because we love and cherish them as colleagues, but it's because those buildings have central air, and as we all know, that summertime in a cinder block building can be somewhat uncomfortable. So we're very thankful to have them host us in those very cool buildings for every single year that I've been here. All right, so back to COVID. Navigating whether or not we'd be able to run our social skills program at Boys and Girls Club was back and forth due to the fact that the Office of Early Childhood had ever evolving health guidance that affected group size and camp size and other factors within camp settings. So that complicated things last year, in that we were struggling out what we could in person extended school year services. So in collaboration with Dr. De Silva and Dr. Han, we did run Rise in person, which I think was a miraculous feat for all of us as a team. The academy and itinerant programs ran virtually, but we did have a lot of services delivered both virtually and in person, even during the summer of 2020, which was a feat unto itself. We didn't have Boys and Girls Club as a partner last year, since they also were sort of on the back foot in designing their own programs to be run safely and on a smaller basis. So what that led us to is looking at a new avenue to deliver our IEP social skills services. If Boys and Girls Club was going to be sort of experiencing the same evolving health guidance as we were, I didn't think it was fair to put Mike in a situation where we were always knocking down his door, as it were, to participate in his services if he had to sort of think critically about his services and how to deliver them the same way that we did. In addition, we recognized that 2020 was far from a typical year of learning, and we wanted to make sure that we could in-house do something that was creative, fun, and service the IEPs the way that we should. So in addition to that, under the guidance of the state of Connecticut, Dr. Hanaway and I decided that aside from extended school year services for special ed, that we would also offer services for our Tier 3 MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support, and for English language services from grades K to 5 to make sure that students who are on the cusp of gaining additional English language skills and on the cusp of remediating some skills in math or English, that they wouldn't lose that steam that's so critical to maintain during the summer months. And we had our school-based teams make recommendations for each of those groups. And then we expanded to 8th grade from kindergarten for this year. All right, so going back to social skills programming and the Boys and Girls Club, to try to get around the need to do that programming at Boys and Girls Club, we decided to look at an in-house program to fulfill that social skills services component, and really target the kids who needed that for their that ongoing support in their IEP, and then even follow the Boys and Girls Club model and use typical or non-disabled peers as a social language and behavioral model. And we also saw that as an opportunity to really have some fun with it. So I can't remember actually who actually decided that was going to be the name of it, but because I don't remember actually being aware of the organization of Best Buddies before this summer, but I'm so glad I am now, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But we dubbed it Best Buddies after the national organization that does the exact same thing in pairing a child with a disability with a non-disabled peer in their community. So we decided that was going to be the name, and that we'd follow that model. And a camp style, I solicited applications from every parent in the district and received well over 100 families that were very eager to have their child participate. We ended up designing it to offer music, sports and games, arts and crafts, science, swimming at the rec center, pool next to Barlow, in addition to some really fun field trips to forge those inter-peer relationships. And we were able to staff it in-house as well. Many of our special education teachers, our specials teachers, including gym teachers, music teachers, were interested. Many of our paraeducators wanted to stay for that 5th and 6th week. And our related service providers were all interested in doing that work, being as excited and curious about it as I was. So in the end, we used that model to loosely pair students to foster social skills. I took from the applications kiddos that would be of a similar grade level, if not same grade level, and then padded our numbers a little bit. So we had several opportunities to have non-disabled peers working with kids at their similar grade levels in that camp style setting. And then that was facilitated by our staff to give them activities where they could make connections and converse and pair and share and go on trips and share toys and picnic together. And it was a wonderful success. The photographs don't convey the laughter and the fun that we had, the relays and the sort of Olympic themed relays that we had in Ballard Park. It really was a special time for everyone. All right, so onward. What comes next? Like I said, Best Buddies, I think in everyone's view, was a big success. I'm looking forward to having it again next summer to fulfill that social skills program in-house. There's been a lot of interest from families and staff to bridge, no pun intended, excuse me, Corey, to carry over, we'll say, Best Buddies into the school year. So we're applying to be an official chapter of the Best Buddies organization. I'd love to involve or more integrally embed Best Buddies as part of our ESY programming, potentially for a longer stretch instead of just 2 weeks. Target those social skills goals to have a longer duration during the summer and involve more students. And of course, we'll use the data that we've collected from recommendations, our student involvement, goals and objectives to really drill down and drive that program design offering, along with input from staff that we solicit at the end of every summer, to make sure that we are really hitting the nail on the head in terms of what we offer and recommend through our IEPs. And then, of course, if Bridge continues, we'd love to make sure that collaboration and calibration continues, especially as our dates align, because we don't want staff to hop back and forth. So to make sure that we have seamless opportunities for our staff to be involved in one program or another as it meets their interest and their availability during the summer. All right, and then just this last slide, I think, is a nice example of a testimonial both from kids and from parents as to the meaning of our Best Buddies program for the summer and what it meant to them. Give you guys a second to read that. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to pause here for questions.
Thank you. That was very moving. Do we have questions from the board?
Looks like Rachel has her hand up.
Rachel.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for your endless commitment to the children and families of RPS. You were able to put together such thoughtful programs in a small amount of time that were relative to the needs of the children with extreme warmth and care. It was extremely touching. And also thank you to our teachers and staff who were instrumental in having the program run. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.
Kathleen.
I thank you. And of course, you needed to express how it serviced, the special ed students. But I don't want to underscore how important it probably was. And I'm just assuming as for the children who were on the other side, the children who were not the SPED kids, but those that became the buddies. And to me, that will be the exponential work, because that spreads and that can become a milestone in our schools as they become more compassionate. I don't want to use the word compassionate. They just become better people, and they've learned, and it's just great.
Well said, Kathleen. Tina.
Just to echo of what Kathleen and Rachel said, thank you. I think this is a great thing you did. We've talked about this. You know, we know we've had pockets of this at Ridgebury. I remember when we were at Ridgebury, we had to walk in their shoes, you know, teaching regular, typical peers what it is to have a child with a differently able. So I'm so glad that you're doing this. And my child did not participate. You know, he's 14. He doesn't do what I tell him to do, but I know there are kids who did. And I think they all talked about a wonderful experience this was. And from parents I heard, I know there are a lot of families who were part of this. So I think it's great. And while you were talking, I was trying to Google Best Buddies, and it's a nonprofit. I'm trying to understand what it is. So I'm glad that you're working on it. We're thinking about, we're not taking the kids away, we're making it, we keep talking, Richfield always talks about pushing back kids, all kids together in a classroom. And this is an example of this. And it was during summer. So thank you to all the teachers, all the staff, all the parents, everybody who was part of this. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Dr. Shoa, I think the overwhelming response is thank you.
Thank you all. I'm very happy to have the support of Dr. Hanaway and Dr. De Silva and all of you. It's not an easy thing to design and implement, but certainly without the support, it couldn't have happened to begin with. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tony. So transitioning to our bridge program, unlike the ESY program, it is new to Ridgefield. And while we do tentatively plan for Bridge 2 next summer, in this summer really gave us some insight on what we could do well and perhaps what we might change. So I'll turn it over to Corey and allow her a minute to present her team and all the folks that really had their hands in the bridge program this summer.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So John, before you put up the presentation, I just want to make sure that we acknowledge the people on the screen tonight. So at the elementary level, our directors were Jen Hildebrand. Jen, if you could just wave your hand. Kristen Kleiss. Then Kara Tanner came in and served during the bridge program at the elementary level. At the middle school, we had our dynamic duo, Amanda Johnson and Shane Peters. And then at the high school, leading multiple programs, we had Jen DiGiulio and Eileen Stewart. So I am sharing out, and it is my pleasure to share out a report on the bridge program, but I am not here alone. I represent the work of all of these people on the call. Dr. Hanaway and her logistical mind, which is so important to have next to mine, and all the teachers that put in so much time and effort to make this an incredible experience for all of us. So John, if you could share the presentation, thank you. Next slide, please. So when I was going through all of our documents and our plans from when this idea began in Dr. De Silva's head in April of this year, I looked at the website that we created, and this was one of the first quotes that we picked to put on the website. It is the moments together that change us forever. And now sitting here after 6 weeks of the RPS Summer Bridge program, that could not be more true. Next slide, thank you. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about overall how we assess the program and the implementation of the program, how it went from idea to reality, what the student participation looked like, a review of the programming at each level, and then some final thoughts and next steps. So overall, how did the program go? Next slide, please. So this was our initial goal, to provide a bridge to the experiences and the moments that we missed. We wanted our students to come back, engage with their peers, unplug, learn new things in a low stress and highly engaging environment. And according to the parent feedback, the student feedback, the teacher feedback, we more than exceeded that goal. One of the things that we did often to make sure that we could quantify how this program went was we gave surveys to different stakeholders at different levels. We asked our students, we asked our teachers, and we asked our parents, how are we doing? How is it going? We even did this daily in unofficial surveys when we asked our students each day, and the directors can attest to this, what we could do the next day to make it even more fun. So you can see here that kids gave us a lot of feedback on what they liked. They were the most honest. Mostly in their feedback, they would tell us what they liked and how we could create more opportunities for them to do that activity again. Next slide, please. Our teachers, a big bonus for us and for our teachers and all the staff that worked at the Summer Bridge was the opportunity to really unplug. We got to pull back from the screens in our classrooms and really engage with our students, regain that pure joy that is teaching and learning. And even more, our teachers got to connect with colleagues across the district that they had perhaps never worked with before. Next slide, please. And then our assessment from the parents. We gave our parents surveys at the end of each session to see how well we did. We gave them a 1 to 5 scale, and 90% of the parents in all the surveys for all the different sessions gave us exceptional, the highest rating for the experience that their child got each and every day at the Bridge program. It's not to say that we didn't have some initial challenges with pickup and drop off, dealing with little kids at East Ridge, which was such a big school, but we made it through those. Our directors did those challenges. Our directors did an incredible job communicating with parents, and we made everything work. So according to all indicators and reports from all stakeholders, this was a success. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the student participation. Next slide. So one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about tonight, are the different opportunities that high school students had to participate in the Summer Bridge. We did talk a lot about the intensives, which were those short 3 to 5 day courses that high school kids could sign up for that were focused around one content area. So we had a cooking experience, we had an art and chemistry experience, we had different engineering options, music options. So we had 142 students attend that. Then we had course recovery, which was the opportunity for students who were going to have to repeat a course next year to instead work with our highly talented, small, but highly talented staff of teachers from the high school to recover that learning, to take their course, to finish what was incomplete. This year, for the first time in Ridgefield, we used a computer software program to help us deliver the courses. And I believe we were able to offer 15 different course options to our students, which is more than we were ever able to offer in the past. So that means that we provided 15 courses that if a student wasn't able to complete it during the school year, they were able to after taking this course and with the help of their teachers this summer. So that was the second option for high school students. High school readiness was an opportunity that we gave our middle school students, our rising ninth graders, to come and spend some time with high school teachers, tour the high school, get some tips on planning and organization and reading schedules. So it was really social emotional prep for high school. And then the last part was the opportunity that we gave 55 high school students to be volunteers in the Bridge program. So we had high school volunteers at the elementary and middle school Bridge programs. And I know the directors can tell you, though you can't see them perhaps right now, how essential having those additional people to support the students, but also to build the fun and the relationships that were happening in the games and the kickball games out in the field. So for high school, we had 301 students participating. In grades 6 through 8, we had 238. And then in grades PK through 5, our most popular, we had 742 students. So it was almost 1,300 students that were able to participate in the Bridge program. And you can see there are a lot of different diverse ways that they could engage, especially at the high school level. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly go through each level and talk a little bit about how those programs went. So next slide. We'll start with the elementary program. You can see here one of our directors, Kristen Kleiss. She and Jen Hildebrand, when they were creating this program, decided that a great theme would be the superhero theme. And you can see that that's my slide theme for tonight, because it really resonated with all of us, because we wanted our students to engage in the imaginative experience of superheroes, creating comics, reading books about people who can do exceptional things. But we also wanted them to recognize the superheroes in the real world, the superheroes in their lives, and then the superhero in themselves. And that really did come to play. So you can see here's one of those fun moments of being a superhero, is you get to have crazy, crazy hair. The elementary program did include some fun academics, but really the majority of the time, the students were engaged in projects. Depending on the sessions, there were different projects and different specialists pushing in. From the surveys, a special that got a lot of attention was the sign language special. Students were very excited about the opportunity to learn sign language. And of course, cooking, all-time favorite, always came up as a exciting opportunity for students that they're not used to doing in school with their teachers. The other thing that we found at the elementary level was that these projects that we could take across multiple days, like the carnival that they created, and on the last day, kids from all other grades were able to come and engage in playing in the carnival, were things that kids really were excited about and engaged in. So the elementary program had some of that academics, but really there were a lot of projects and a lot of play. And yes, my favorite, kickball, did show up in there. Next slide, please. So middle school, Bridge, and here we have a picture of those directors right there. Really their theme was the camp theme along with community service. So you can see here that one of the teachers did s'mores inside. And you can also see that there are some fairy houses that they built. They also did some community service projects around East Ridge Middle School and created some gardens, some actual gardens that I heard from Shane are producing a lot of vegetables right now. And they also cleaned up the front of the school and those in the flower beds. So the middle school was about camps, playing, engaging in projects, having lots of choice, and creating birdhouses and fairy houses. Next slide, please. So here's some pictures of some of the intensives. It was really fun as an adult to get to go and watch what the kids were able to create. And I just talked to you when we were talking about participation about the other high school opportunities that we had students participating in, the course recovery, high school readiness for rising ninth graders, and then the volunteers, the high school volunteers. Next slide, please. So like anything, like any big project, when it's done, you have some ideas about how you could perhaps do some things differently. So next slide, please. So if we had the chance to do this again, we have a couple ideas. One of the things that we noticed was that students who had just graduated from their levels, this was the 5th graders and the 8th graders, they were a little bit bummed at times to be back in an elementary school, say for a 5th grader, if they had just graduated. So if we were to do this again, we would move the 5th graders up with middle schoolers and the same move the 8th graders up with the high schoolers. As much as we wanted this program to be a bridge back and to continue the school year, it really is true that if you just graduated, you just had a big graduation ceremony, you probably don't feel the same feeling about going back to an elementary school building or a middle school building. So that's one thing we were thinking about if we had an opportunity to do this again. And another thing we were thinking about is at the middle school level, giving them some of the intensive choices that we saw the high school students really, really engaged in. The middle school kids were very specific with their feedback. Like I said, the things they liked, and the things they didn't like, they didn't like. Community service didn't always get the highest ratings, but we know they did something really nice for the school community with the gardens that they created. So that's a couple of the thoughts about how programming might change if we could do this again. But really, ultimately, what we realized in the end was that we initially created this program for the kids. And for them to have that opportunity to connect and step away from technology and build relationships and have out of the box experiences and really find that joy. And in the end, the kids were able to do that, but so were we. All of the adults that were able to be a part of this felt the same way. So it was a bridge for us as much as it was a bridge for them. And again, it could not have been possible without all of the directors that are here today. These are Ridgefield's own exceptional leaders. They were creative. They were problem solvers. They were reliable. They worked 24/7, and we couldn't be more proud of them. So thank you. And any questions?
Thank you for that. I already see some hands up. I'll start with Sean.
Not so much a question as a comment. You guys put this together on incredibly short notice and outperformed my expectations on enrollment, and just a great job. Standing ovation, just amazed. That's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Kathleen.
I can put all the kudos, but as to add on to what you said about what to think about, I'm just thinking about, it's been almost 18 months where all children have not returned to school. It would be wonderful, particularly having looked at the children and the teachers' comments about the building of community, how the teachers found joy, how the children found joy. Maybe the people who are involved in it, particularly the adults, could share that with the entire teaching community, so that as there's a softer landing, when children come back in a week or so, and talking about the joyous ways that you did to make the children feel community involved, part of community and involved. It just seems like it's bigger, and you've created something that is wonderful. And if that could be shared, I'm just thinking of a softer landing and a community landing. Thank you.
Thank you. We are planning to do that at Convocation.
Spoiler alert, Corey.
Tina.
I mean, echoing what Sean and Kathleen said, thank you. I think this was amazing. The fact, again, it was, we thought there would be less enrollment, at least at the high school level. That's great. It's amazing what you got. And I agree with what Corey said. That was the feedback I got from many parents, especially who are rising freshmen or moving into middle school. You know, they just want to go to their new school. And and bridge can be also the bridge to the future, if you will, for next year. And my only other comment is, and this is from feedback from, I've been talking to families, because I keep saying that I do talk to a lot of people, and I think you know me enough to know that I do. The fact that the high school kids had so much hands-on learning, it lays more emphasis that there is a growing need for more and more classes with hands-on learning. Not every child will excel in, the regular, if you will, math, science, and all. So I'm so glad that you offered that. And as you look forward into the future, if we can offer more of those kind of classes, even cooking with science, there is a component of learning, but there's also hands-on. So it's great that you offered it. When you look into the future, if we can offer more of those classes, because I know there's also a growing conversation among parents to offer more of those classes at the high school level. So just thank you. And just when we look into the future, just to look into that.
Thanks, Tina. Margaret?
I'd also like to say thank you. We've been hearing about this program for a while, but tonight's presentation really, at least for me, brought it to life a little bit more, not having had children who participated. So thank you for walking us through and some of the pictures and sharing the comments. And I love that you got feedback constantly along the way. I just had two questions. One was just about numbers, and I agree, absolutely. I'm so I'm so happy to see the high numbers of participants. I wondered, are these numbers unique participants, or could kids only participate once in a bridge program, or could they have participated multiple times?
There could be a couple kids who were able to take high school readiness and go to bridge for middle school. So we didn't have their names to tease them out, but that's the number of kids who attended each of those sessions. So there could be some crossovers.
Okay. Neither here nor there necessarily. I was just curious. But the second thing, Corey, as you mentioned, and I love the fact that, again, you're doing kind of the review cycle to think about what could we do differently. I heard you say, if we have the chance to do it again, and I just wondered what some of those barriers might be to doing it again.
She's going to look right at me.
I am.
So we have applied for our ESSER ARP funds. That's a primary barrier, is if for some reason those funds had to be utilized in a different way this year. We had the benefit of this summer using remaining funds from our fiscal year, and we had ESSER funds, the first round of ESSER 2 funds. And so that really is what, and we're wrapping up those final numbers, or the business offices, but that really did financially support the program because we ran, multiple sessions. So it wasn't just 2 weeks, right? So those multiple sessions obviously provided a lot for kids and had our enrollment up, but certainly kept our costs in a space where we just had to be sure that we can manage it for the summer. And I think you'll hear shortly in the next phase of our presentation is, while we have a lot of knowns, what we were anticipating in June is a little bit different than what's happening now. And so as a result of that, we just had to be mindful that we may have to use funds that we didn't necessarily hope to use before that time. So that's the primary barrier, Margaret, would really be funding. I think that, just to speak for Corey and the team, they've done a really good job of identifying the way in which parts of this program can be duplicated. And so some of the planning work that obviously was, was costly this year wouldn't necessarily be costly next year, because we have the ability to duplicate our efforts. So that's the good news. And I know some of the resources that we purchased, we can use again for next year. But I think that that's really the primary barrier. And ultimately, as much as the program was successful, and I think that the team did a really good job of assessing and really modifying as they went along. What Corey didn't mention is we had elementary children at Eastridge. When it came to the second session, they knew that space wasn't ideal. We knew a little bit more then. We moved the children in the program. It didn't feel anything. Parents didn't feel it on the back end, but on our end, we did. And so with the modifying and adjusting and what we learned this year, over the course of this year, I think will help build an even more successful program into next year.
Piggybacking on that, if the ESSER funds are not there for next year's bridge, would you anticipate putting bridge into your superintendent's proposed budget anyway?
It's a really good question, Jonathan, and I've been thinking a lot about that, in particular for the month of June, or part of the fiscal year than which we could cover it. I do think that there's an opportunity here, in particular, to support kids that really would benefit from supplemental services as opposed to supplanting. There's only so many hours in a school day. We realize that. And so for kids that really do benefit from quote unquote extra, I think that there is, our team is considering that for sure.
Other board questions or comments? Once again, I think the overarching comment is thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you.
Shall we move on to the safe return plan?
Yes, so I'm going to start us off. Actually, we just reviewed our minutes from August 9th. So since that time, and really what I need to say is that the information that we receive is just ongoing. We received several executive orders, or one really that impacted us last week from the governor. We received an update from the State Department of Education early last week. And so we're still in the process of taking this information and expecting more, quite frankly, and taking this information and understanding how this information really gets translated to the practical. And one of the biggest, you'll hear a couple of updates from August 9th, but I just want folks to know that it is ever changing. And so one of the things that I think this team does really well is we modify and adjust. We're not afraid to say, oh, let's take a step back. I think we need to readjust our thinking. We did that last year, and if we need to, we'll do that again this year. I'm going to start off just by talking about what I think a lot of people are talking about, which is the governor's executive orders around faculty and staff being vaccinated. And then I'll turn it over to Aaron, who's going to talk about screening for students and faculty in grades K through 6. Then Dr. Hanaway is going to talk about the continuity of learning and some other health and safety updates. But again, I feel like I need to preface this all with saying that information is ever changing. And there's a lot that we haven't figured out. And the last thing we want to do is communicate to our families, communicate to our faculty when we haven't processed well, we haven't thought about the impact, because it's far harder to undo than just take a minute to pause. Our faculty returns tomorrow. And so we're back to meeting with our elementary and our secondary representative groups. That was a practice that we put into place last year, because our teachers really do have the greatest level of insight on how our thinking translates into their classroom and impacts their students and impacts their families. So we're very much looking forward to connecting with them tomorrow morning, actually. So that all of those different pieces will come into play in terms of how we communicate, when we communicate, and what we communicate. That said, again, as I mentioned, the K-12 vaccinations in the governor's executive order is really, I think, top of mind for many of us, and how that's actually going to look in our schools. So I think it's important to note that it's not just our K-12 staff, it's our early childhood staff. So that's our preschool teachers. It includes our support staff, and whether that's our transportation, food service staff, our paraprofessionals, our school resource officers. And some of those, we have direct contact with day to day, and some of those folks we don't have direct contact day to day, meaning our transportation are covered by staff are covered by a different unit. Food service is covered by a different unit. Our school resource officers are a partnership with the police department. So all of those individuals and how they connect to our school and how we process the information, both through HR and then from a health and safety perspective, is still yet to come. So what we do know is that by September 27th, all of those individuals who work in our school that are not volunteers will be required to have at least one of their vaccinations by that time. What's a little bit less clear, and we're still trying to sort through, is what the options are for those individuals who are not electing to be vaccinated, whether those are exemptions for religious reasons or for medical reasons. That's not quite as clear yet. And so we're still sorting through that. Screenings, if they elect not to be vaccinated, and if the exemptions play a role in it, what those screenings will look like in terms of who's obligated to take on the cost of that. We still haven't sorted through that. What happens with issues of compliance? Who are the individuals that are going to oversee the issues of compliance? So there's a lot of small details, as you can see through my description, that we're just not prepared to communicate out. Part of that is not because we're not prepared to plan, because we are prepared to plan for that. But part of that is because we're still receiving guidance from the State Department of Education and even legal, and certainly in collaboration with our unions. So that's where we are right now with the new executive order. We didn't necessarily anticipate that that was coming. Superintendents heard shortly before that the governor's press conference that it was anticipated that this is something that the governor was going to bring up, but we really didn't have any advance notice in terms of preparation. But now we know, and so I'm confident that my team that's on the line, and along with our steering committee and Ed Briggs and Dr. Ahern, I'm sure will weigh in. We'll create a plan that makes sense for our faculty and staff, and certainly for those of us that are overseeing the implementation. So that's one update that's pretty recent. You're going to hear about other updates that are pretty recent as well, but I'm actually going to transition it over to Aaron, who's going to be talking about screening in grades K through 6. This is not an option for preschool, so it is limited to students in K-6 along with faculty. So I'll turn it over to Erin, and then maybe what we can do is perhaps, actually, we'll turn it over to Dr. Hanaway, and then we'll take all the questions at the end. So maybe you can just write a list of questions as we go along. Erin, why don't you take it from here?
Greetings, everyone. It's nice to see you all this evening. So we learned late in the summer that the State Department of Education and Department of Public Health, using federal dollars, are contracting with COVID-19 screening test providers to offer free of charge to every school district in the state of Connecticut for kindergarten through 6th grade unvaccinated students and unvaccinated staff members. The idea of the program is that the vaccine has not yet been approved for that age group. So one mitigation effort, one extra layer of mitigation that we can add to the elementary school and 6th grade situation is to do weekly screening tests, knowing that as many as 40% of COVID-19 cases are asymptomatic. The idea is that we can catch those cases early before people realize they may be infected, and try to inform parents and help prevent those people from being in the school building if they are able to transmit it to others. A couple of details about the program. It is voluntary, it is not mandatory, so parents will have the option to opt into it or opt out of it. A parent could opt their child in, and then they could change their mind and opt their child out, and that would be completely fine. The state has told us we have expressed interest as a district in participating in this program, and the state has told us that we will be hearing from a vendor at some period of time. The goal is for this testing to begin around September 13th, and many of the logistical details of how the tests will work, where they will take place, will happen directly between the district and the vendor. The state is simply signing the contracts, assigning the vendor to the district, and then we work directly with the vendor to work out the details. It is a pooled PCR test. The results, if we do get any positive results, will be communicated directly from the vendor to the parents and directly from the vendor to RPS. At that point, if we did end up with a positive test result, we would begin a contact tracing protocol similar to like we have done throughout the school year. So those are the basic details. Susie, did I miss anything important?
The only piece, Erin, unvaccinated staff in grades K through 6 may also be a part of the screening, right?
Yes.
At no cost.
They may also opt in to the screening testing as well.
Preschool is not included in the state-funded PCR tests, although school districts who elected to do that could use ESSER funds, as I understand it, to include preschool, but it is not included. And Erin, did you mention that families can opt in and then opt out if they elect to? Okay.
Yes, I did.
I think you got all of it, Erin.
Thank you.
So, you know, Jonathan, maybe do we want to stop here and see if there's any questions on just those two pieces? Because I think we might have for the next piece.
Sure. Any questions at this point from board members?
I have a couple.
Rachel?
So I know, thank you so much, Erin, for going through that for us. I know you described the screening, but what if there's a quarantine situation? Can students use the screening process to get tested to see if they have COVID-19?
That's a great question. This is not for that purpose. This is only for the purpose of screening. If you had a student that needed a diagnostic test, they would be discouraged from coming into school if there was a potential that they were positive or if they had symptoms. So if a student came into school symptomatic with a fever that day, we would send them home. They would not receive a screening test, and they would be referred to their healthcare provider to receive a diagnostic test in the community.
Okay. Do you think there's any thing that might be coming down from the Connecticut State Department of Education where, as a school district, we could set up a point possibly in town, work with the first selectman on having a place where students can go to get tested? Because I know that would have access for families, especially
Yeah.
now that a lot of people are back at work, right?
At this point in time, we have nothing like that has been communicated to us from the state. We did have a partnership with the town and a testing provider last year that worked out very well for the district. But we could look into options like that, certainly.
Rachel, as part of the COVID task force that I'm on that meets weekly with the first selectman, Ed Briggs, the RVNA, and other individuals, including Rick Lawrence, who I'm sure some of you have heard of. He's a data scientist that provides the town with the COVID data. That is an ongoing conversation of when and if it's necessary. Is that something that we could bring back into our community? You might remember that we had docs over at Yanity for a while, right outside, in fact, the Board of Ed offices. So it's an ongoing conversation. If it's necessary, we can certainly have that conversation with the town.
Thank you so much.
Aaron, I don't know if you were, you mentioned, I may have missed it, that the length of the amount of time it would take to test the children.
Yeah, so the logistics of administering the test would be worked out directly by us and the provider. But certainly what we would do is minimize the amount of time by sending groups of kids down to you maximize the amount of time that they spend in the classroom. A lot of those logistics remain to be worked out, but certainly that's a consideration. We wouldn't want large groups of kids waiting in long lines to get tested and missing class time. So we would definitely plan for that.
Thanks. I see Tina has another question.
Just following up with what Aaron said. So are we planning, if we go through this and if parents opt in, will this be done during school hours or after school hours? I mean, I know these are, you're still planning, just
yeah. So what we've been told so far by the state of Connecticut is the vendor will come to the school. The school will provide a place in the building for the vendor to set up. It's a shallow nasal swab. It's not the deep nasal pharyngeal swab. The vendor will provide a tester, an individual to actually do the test, process the test. So all we need to do as a district is bring the children to that location in the building for the test to take place on a weekly basis.
We were told that it wouldn't take more than about a minute per child from beginning to end. That's what was anticipated when they did their practices, that it took about a minute to get students in, swabbed, and out.
Liz.
Thanks. I just have a question about this vendor and the contract. I understand the state is the one signing it. Will parents have access to the information in that contract, especially around data privacy and security? And will the people that are in the schools have full background checks and credentials and that process, but also just in general, will we have access as a community to whatever this vendor contract is?
I can answer part of that. The good questions, Liz. With respect to data privacy, the state is the one that requires us to go through the data privacy already in district with all of our vendors. So I would anticipate, but certainly once we receive the contract and we understand that, it would go through legal and go through our both our business office and our technology department to ensure that the data privacy that we already follow is enacted. In terms of parents having access to the contract, once we receive it and we understand what that looks like, we can certainly make that available to any family who would like to see it. Did I answer everything, or what did I miss, Liz?
The other question was, what about the people from this vendor that are going to be inside the schools? What process are we following there?
I would imagine that they would need to go through the background checks, but we'll be sure that that's all done. I can't imagine that anyone that's coming into our schools in an ongoing basis wouldn't go through that process. We do that already, but we'll be sure.
Good questions. Anyone else? Tina.
Sorry, last question. I'm just assuming, again, I know you're working on the logistics. If we do offer this and this does come in, it'll be kind of done. We would hope to have the results a quick turnaround time because, you know, there are a lot of COVID can be asymptomatic and the kids can carry it. So I'm just is an assumption, right? I know last year a lot of private schools were doing testing after long holidays or on Fridays so that the kids have a result on a weekend so that the families knew about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That same question was asked on the state webinar for districts, and it was emphasized that that is an important factor in this, having a quick turnaround time. The answer from the state was that the logistics on the day that they would come to which building and when they would test would be worked out directly with the vendor. So we would have to speak with the vendor once they were assigned to us at that point about what that turnaround time would be, but certainly the sooner the better in all cases.
Tina, the one thing that we did discuss on our Friday meeting as well is just that the laboratories across the state are definitely backed up with results. And so many individuals who are taking the PCR test, rather than seeing those results in 24 to 48 hours, which we were seeing probably a month ago, are now seeing them more closely to 72 hours. In particular, those individuals who are traveling and actually need the PCR to travel are finding that they're not able to actually get their results in time to travel. So there's certainly a backup. I'm actually hoping that if we did have the vendor in district, that we would be receiving the results sooner than what we're seeing now. But I imagine that that might change between now and then as well.
Rachel, I saw your hand. Rachel, go ahead.
Aaron, I just have a question for you. So it's not the vaccinated students can't be screened? Was there anything on the webinar that came up about that?
So this particular program that's being offered was specifically for unvaccinated students. That's what the federal dollars were covering. That's what the state was offering.
Rachel, it's primarily focused on the students that aren't able to be vaccinated, so K through 6. So in fact, when we even asked, at least on one of the calls, we asked, what about some 7th graders? Because you may actually have some young 7th graders that don't have the ability to be vaccinated. They really limited it to K6. I think just to have some more focus on, the majority of the 12s would be in grade 6. So it's really focused on the children that don't have the ability to be vaccinated.
Okay.
Kathleen.
I heard this at the end, and this may not be the question for now, and it may be a legal question, is are we able to require faculty who do not have health exemptions to be vaccinated, since we are a public sector?
Kathleen, that seems to be less clear right now from, we just need clarity on that. The governor's order is read one way, and then our legal has interpreted it a different way. And so we just want some clarity on that before we move forward with our faculty, so that we, again, just in the interest of clarity and purpose, we want to be sure that when we have a plan that's communicated to our faculty, it's communicated as accurately as possible. But a lot of this information is coming very quickly. And so I don't know the answer to your question in terms of whether or not we can require it at this point, because that's less clear.
I totally respect that. Thank you.
What we do know, though, Kathleen, whether or not they have the exemption or don't, whether or not they're required to have the exemption, we do know that if they are not vaccinated, the requirement of the weekly screening is there. So that we know for sure. Whether or not it'll be mandated if they don't have the exemptions that, according to governor's order, are available to them, we do know for sure that they will be required, if they're unvaccinated, to submit a weekly screening. At whose cost, we're unclear about. What the consequence would be if they didn't have it, we're unclear about. What staffing would look like, we're still not sure. So, unfortunately, some of those small details, we just don't have the ability to communicate it out yet, but hopefully soon.
Thank you.
How would the district keep track of those screenings and vaccinations?
That's a great question. And so we're creating a system in which to do that also. And so there's obviously, like I mentioned at the start of our conversation about safe return, is that there's a lot of different players. And so, for example, food service or guest teachers, substitutes, those can change daily. And so being sure that we understand who's coming into our school, Communicating with the department heads, both within our district and outside of our district, is important, but we're going to create a system that is incredibly clear and that we have the ability to identify every individual who's in our school that is not exempt and what their vaccination status is. And if they're not vaccinated, that we're getting those weekly screenings. But we will create a system in which to do that.
Anyone else in this segment of the safe return plan, or should we move on to the next section?
Okay, so I will turn it over to Dr. Hanaway. I know she has some additional health and safety updates, and Erin or I will jump in wherever it's appropriate, along with the continuity of learning. So why don't you jump right in, Dr. Hanaway?
Okay, so we posted after our August 9th meeting, we posted the safe return plan as a Google Doc on the district website. And of course, not long after we held the meeting, the state continued to provide new updated guidance. So what we've done is we've put in the header of that document, a key that I think will probably continue to be added to that for now indicates changes will be documented through a strike through and additions with underline. I think bolded is probably next for whatever comes, but we know that, you know, deleting things in these documents gets confusing over time. And so not to make it even more confusing with all these annotations, that's the way that we logistically decided to do it. So there's two things that have already been included in that. One is that the contact tracing protocols for exposure between students is no longer, vaccinated students who are masked is no longer at the 6 feet, but at the 3 feet distance. And again, that's between students within the classroom. And then the second piece that is a change from when we met was that we, at the time, we had included that staff were permitted to be unmasked, vaccinated staff permitted to be unmasked when students are not in the building. We have no longer been permitted to avail this option that all persons inside the school building have to remain masked. So that is also a change from August 9th. And so as additional changes come, we have not included anything in it right now around the topics that we've just been talking about for screenings and for mandatory vaccinations and screenings for unvaccinated staff members, because we, as Susie's mentioned multiple times, we need more clarification on those. So I'll shift to talk a little bit about, oh, I'm sorry, Erin, do we want to speak a little bit about mask exemptions as well?
Actually, Dr. Hanaway, I just wanted to clarify a point that you just brought up or add to it. So the 3-foot social distancing isn't only for vaccinated students. It could be masked, unvaccinated students in the elementary school as well. So
thank you.
As long as they're in their classroom setting. And what that actually looks like in a classroom, elementary classroom, you could all picture what that looks like in terms of their day when they're sitting, then off to recess, off to lunch, in the hall. That logistically, we're going to have to understand what that actually practically, let's just say, would look like. Like, when would we not have to quarantine an elementary student unless we tracked all of their day along with their seating assignments? But that is for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students when they're sitting at their desks with their masks on.
Right. Thank you. Erin, do you want to speak to additional information around mask exemptions for students?
Yes, I'm happy to. On Thursday, we received updated guidance from the Department of Public Health and jointly with the CSDE, specifying what types of exemptions would be allowed for masks in school. And it's basically the same as last year. At this point in time, we're told that from legal that it's binding guidance. So there are some and very few medical conditions like severe COPD secondary to cystic fibrosis, a severe facial burn, a general asthma, a little shortness of breath, speech delays, and things like that are not going to be considered from per the Department of Public Health for mask exemptions. There will be some situations where we have students with special needs who are unable to wear a mask for one reason or another. Last year, we worked with those individuals to maximize the amount of time that they were able to keep their mask on while in school. This guidance is binding through the 30th of September. At this point, that's all we know. We're expecting updated guidance from the state or the governor before then to let us know whether or not that is going to be continued beyond that date.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to shift to talk about continuity of learning, which is a second component of our Safe Return plan. So there's a state released last week, an updated Adapt, Achieve, and Advance plan, which is nowhere nearly as long or robust as last year's, but for the most part, the information included within it is part of our current programming right now and our planning right now. The one inclusion that we are still working through is that they allow for vaccinated faculty members to unmask if they are in what they call active instruction, which means distanced and in the distance from students in the front of the classroom, if necessary, temporarily for instructional purposes. Students have to be seated at their desks with their masks on, and teachers who have been vaccinated but exposed without showing symptoms, who may not have to quarantine as a result, cannot exercise this option. So we're still working through how to practically think through the right times when this might happen. So some caveats as to why it may not happen. One, there might be a student in the class with a mask exemption. And so that would render this impossible to do because students have to be masked. The lesson might be dynamic and require that the teacher move around the room. We're not leaving them, distance and standing solely at the front of the room. The teacher may have been exposed previously. We did get a lot of feedback from families last year, specific to times in which being unmasked would have been beneficial for instructional purposes. So we are carefully thinking about those, whether they be literacy-based times, learning a second language, times for social emotional community building. So we're cognizant of the benefits of doing that, but we're also careful around communicating a piece like this to the faculty to make sure that it can be followed when folks are in their classroom independently and everyone remains safe. So then the second piece that I'll shift to regarding continuity of learning has to do with educating quarantined students. So in our August 9th plan, we presented at the time our plan for educating quarantined students, which at the elementary level included a mix of synchronous and asynchronous instruction per grade level through building subs. And at the secondary level included asynchronous instruction through the use of the Google Classroom and the posting of assignments. And this would be for students who are not sick with COVID or not home with symptoms who are actively sick. This is for students who are well, but in quarantine. So I think that we have been thinking thoroughly about particularly at the secondary level and the impact for these students who may go into quarantine early or may go into quarantine multiple times. I think that we have a plan which, for what we know right now, is a good plan, but at the same time, we want to have a backup plan should the numbers of quarantine be higher than we think that they are. We are prepared to reassess in September the quarantine plan as it is right now and pivot, which we've done in the past, if the quarantine numbers seem different than what we think that they are. We have a high vaccination rate among staff, and we believe we have a high vaccination rate among students grades 7 through 12. We don't have that data absolutely confirmed right now. So again, these vaccinated individuals who have been exposed do not have to quarantine unless they're showing symptoms, and then they would be out sick as you would traditionally be out sick in any year. At the elementary level, as Susie just described a few minutes ago, we recognize that practical logistics of contact tracing within an elementary classroom, students within 3 feet of each other, becomes incredibly difficult. So is the likelihood higher that you're quarantining whole classes at a time? That likelihood is there. And then the instruction comes from the classroom teacher. We have been communicated with that we're not required to contact trace on the bus. And so that would also impact the number of students who are put into quarantine. So as it stands right now, our safe return plan includes for low numbers of quarantine students, which is all the information that we have been receiving. However, we recognize that Delta is not the same COVID that we were dealing with last school year. And so we're prepared to shift our model, particularly at the secondary level, if students need more contact time than we're currently availing for.
Anything else, Liz, or do we want to jump to questions?
Questions? I saw Tina's hand.
Thank you. I mean, I'm listening and I'm already confused. I mean, God bless you. You have to work out all these logistics. So really, it's a lot. Thank you for doing this. I know we don't have a choice. It is what it is. And I thank you, Liz, for mentioning how you're going to look at the secondary level if kids are quarantined for whatever reason. And we've been, I know, and I keep saying this, and I will keep saying this because I hear it from parents. At that level, if they are, if they are exposed and they do test positive and it's a breakthrough case, and if they are vaccinated and their symptoms are light enough, missing 10 or 14 days till the test on, the test negative for COVID is a big deal. So I hope you look into this further, because the other concern that we've all received emails, the comparison with the other districts, right? Some of our neighboring districts are already talking about offering fully remote learning for kids who are quarantined. So, I mean, that comparison will keep coming up. I mean, you don't have to answer it, just, I'm glad that you're looking into it. My question is, and it's just logistics, but I'm trying to understand, because especially at the high school level, when the kids have to do national honors and society and all, if they're quarantined because they test positive, whether vaccinated or not, and if they're absent for 14 days, is that counted as do you see what I'm saying? Is it, how is that attendance counted? Like, how will that be as because we can only miss 10 days. Will it be excused absence, unexcused absence, sick days? Is there different, last year I know we had different, I remember you mentioned 4 different levels of how attendance was taken. Is this going to be this year too?
You or me, Liz?
Susie and you and I are looking at each other on Zoom right now. Yeah, so the attendance would remain the same with regards to coding for students who are in quarantine. The difference is we had additional layers of tracking attendance because they were logging in remotely. So was it absent remote versus absent in person? But they would be separately logged for absence purposes as quarantined in the same way that they were last year.
Tina, I think it's the only caution that I would say about what other districts are doing. We do communicate at both with the Western Connecticut group of superintendents and with our district reference group A. And most of them right now have a plan that looks very similar to ours, that includes having guest teachers or instructional support members checking in with kids, supporting kids, even at the secondary level. Like us, though, I think the reality is there will be acute quarantines, and then there's going to be long-term quarantines. And when you have students that are out, or children that are out for long periods of time, not a day, but we're looking at 10 days, it's not reasonable to have them only logging into Google Classroom. We know that. They wouldn't be able to access their instruction. They would fall behind. They need direct instruction. At the same time, what we are trying to avoid, and Dr. Hanaway has talked about this a lot, as has Ms. Gillette, is our ability to accelerate the learning of the students in front of us. While we certainly, I can't thank our faculty enough for jumping right in last year, and we have the technology and we had the technology, and we did what we needed to do because we had to do it that way. We also knew that our teachers' time was divided among 2 groups of kids. And whether that's 1 kid on the screen or 1 kid in the classroom and the other 24 in the opposite location, they're dividing their time. In a year where we really need to focus and accelerate our students, we'd like to be able to do that. And so we're looking at alternatives for our students that obviously don't want to be quarantined, nor do their families, but are in that position. What can we create? What kind of structure that can we create within a reasonable budgetary allowance that gives them an experience that works for them in an acute way? Again, for long-term quarantines, if we're seeing significant amounts of students in that position, then we are going to have to pivot for sure. And so I think we're starting off the year saying we're going to create a plan that makes sense, in particular for the students that are most vulnerable, which is, we know, that K-6 population, while at the same time accepting and recognizing the fact that we're going to have to make adjustments for our secondary students. And when we start having conversations with our teachers upon their return, they're going to give us great insight on how they can make that work. And again, still focus on a population of children, because we do know that last year was challenging for them. But it was a different kind of year. At this point, we are trying to accelerate our students. And so I think it's just, we have to keep that at front of mind, that this is a different year. And so we're hoping that that is certainly the path that we take, but we also know that a hope is not a plan. And so we have a backup that we're starting to prepare for, and we'll do. But I think we have to be careful comparing, because there's lots of plans that are sent my way and people can use lots of different language to mean the same thing. So whether it's Google Classroom or Schoology, whether it's a tutor or a teacher or a guest teacher, ultimately we do a lot of collaboration. And so our plan right at this moment in time is not different than most. There's a couple of districts that are trying something new or trying something a little bit different, but also going to assess to revert back to something that is a little bit more reasonable as well. So I think it's a little bit of a balance right now. I think there's also a piece that we have to keep in mind. There is school directed quarantines, right? Kids that have been exposed at school and we're saying you have to quarantine. And then there's quarantine for a variety of reasons, some of which we're receiving requests right now. We're traveling, we'd like to have our children do remote. Well, that's something that we're trying to avoid. And we're trying to avoid that because we need to accelerate our kids. Otherwise, we're going to be offering bridge for the next 30 years. And so we need that time with our children, and we have to just really keep that in the forefront of our mind. We're trying to avoid that other people are going to travel. And if they travel internationally and they're unvaccinated, there's a recommendation that they're in quarantine and get tested. But that's not why the remote experience was there last year, and it's not why it's there this year. It was part of the process, but we're trying to avoid that. We're also trying to avoid having unvaccinated children being exposed somewhere else and us trying to decipher, what all those details are and when do they come back, and are we offering remote because of multiple exposures outside of the school setting. So there's a lot of variables, and it's not that we lack empathy or that we don't care for this population of children that may have been exposed. Of course we do. We care for all kids, but at the same time, we have to manage reasonably what we can do as a school if we're going to move forward and rebound from the past year and a half.
Jonathan, can I just add to that just quickly? Thank you. And when I brought up comparison, I know there are a lot of parents who are asking this question, so that's why I wanted to bring it out so that you can address it so that they can hear it.
No, I appreciate that, Tina. I'm getting the same question, and I oftentimes will ask families to call because they'll send me plans. And for those of us that have been working with these school districts or working with these programs, we know that they're the same, but it might appear different or just the way in which it's presented. So again, we recognize for sure, in particular our 6th graders and probably some 7th graders, there is going to be a greater probability that population of children may be in that position of quarantine. We're not going to have children out 7 to 10 days without us finding ways to connect with them and make sure that they're on the right track.
Just last question quickly. I know we're talking about quarantine, and maybe Aaron, you can talk about this. I went up to fill up, the demographics before my child starts school, and there is a drop-down menu in which parents can choose to share if their child is vaccinated or not. As you go through this process, if there are questions when we start looking at quarantining or not, would it be would you require parents to show proof of vaccination, or that will just, you're just going to depend on the yes and no as answered in the Power School portal?
That's something I think that our team would need to work out and discuss a little bit further.
With respect to students, is that, Tina, the question? With respect to students, if the district was requiring a quarantine of a student, we would need the family to show us their vaccination card. Let's say that they did not want to be placed in quarantine because the child was not symptomatic. So we would need some type of evidence that the child has been vaccinated.
Hey, Jonathan, quick question. My camera's still not functioning. I've programmed some pretty complex if-then logic into programs that do really cool stuff. I can't for the life of me figure out if-then what happens with every single one of your scenarios. Is there any way to put this all on one page so a parent has a roadmap of what leads to what?
Yes, Sean, yes, and I would ask that just for a bit longer, that families be patient as we receive additional details and flesh things out. But your point is well taken. And you heard Dr. Hanaway say that there's been some edits or revisions even since the last time we were here on August 9th, but we just want to be clear when we do communicate in writing so that families can follow along. But you're absolutely right. And I think we did a good job of that last year in our plan. And I'm hopeful that we'll do the same this year where it's very clear for parents. But yes, the answer is yes, just be patient a little bit longer.
Thank you.
Other board questions? Not seeing any more hands. Dr. De Silva, is there any more to the safe return plan or should we move on?
I think we got it all. I just looked over our bullets. I think we can move on if there's no other questions.
Excellent. Again, I don't see any hands. Okay. We can move on to the approval of an RHS gift, and this is a motion item. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education accept with gratitude and appreciation a gift of $2,164.63 from the high school PTSA for the purchase of 2 new podiums with accompanying side tables, personalized with Richfield High School's new logo design.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay. Okay. We hear from Dr. Greenwood.
Well, it looks like all the hands are up, so I'm happy. Yeah, we're excited. We always appreciate everything the PTSA does. And this is one of those things where at graduation, they looked up and said, you have 2 podiums, but they don't match. And so it's not that we don't have, but they're adding to the beauty of our school and something for our kids. And so I think it is above and beyond necessarily that what the board has given us podiums, but this will really add to our facilities. And so we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Any questions or concerns from board members on this? No, I think this looks like an easy one. There being no questions, all those in favor, please raise your hands.
My hand is up.
I'll take your word on it, Sean. That makes it 9-0, and the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the RHSPTSA for that great gift.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the financial report ending June 30th. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education accept the financial report ending June 30th, 2021.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Ken again. Okay, who is going to be presenting the financial report?
I'll go over just a few of the key areas. As we came into June 30th, the end of the fiscal year, there was not any surprises that we had not brought to you already. There was definitely some areas that we anticipated having some savings, and there was areas that we anticipated having some overages. Those areas remain true all the way through the end of the fiscal year. Looking at the projections, there out of the $99.9 million, there was actual expenditures of $96.5 million with encumbrances of approximately $3.3 million. What is not in these numbers that are still part of the encumbrances is the year-end accruals. Some of the school projects that were still going on, we didn't receive all the invoices for that. The bridge program has some expenses in there that we had not received all of the detail on as well. Some of the payroll was processed in July, but actually it needs to be accrued back to June. And pretty much that's it, other than the encumbrances that we're still waiting on some product and or services to be completed. That said, we looked at our financials came in with about $35,217 of unspent money or unencumbered money, which put us pretty darn close to spending all of our funds at that point. Any specific questions on the financial part of that?
Board questions? So the total return to the town is about $100,000?
No, we won't know exactly what is returned to the town, Jonathan, until all of the encumbrances are either expired, the services or the product has come in, and the encumbrance is closed, which will be quite some time yet. Usually, a lot of times we have encumbrances that stay open the whole year. And then we are required to close them by the end of the next fiscal year. So we won't know exactly what that number is until probably June of next year.
Dawn, if everything was to fall into place exactly the way it's supposed to, by June of next year, the amount would be $35,217. Am I correct?
If everything were to be exactly that's on this paper, yes.
I realize that it's very often not, but if it were.
Right. Some of the variables, Dr. Silva, would be salaries. When the final programs came in, the timesheets that we had, the accruals that we need to process, those things we can only estimate as to what we're going to have at this time. So those variables are out there.
Thanks, Dawn.
Sure.
Board questions on year-end financials? No possibility of going over, correct?
No, definitely not over. We will have some savings, definitely not over. The one area that is slightly over, which is something that has been reported to you all along as well, was the athletic fund itself. If you look at the report that's in there, you'll see that there's approximately 48,000 over budget, with it known that he would be spending over his budget at the time of the budget was put in place last year. There was, if you recall, there was the funds that were pulled and sent to the town for the Tiger Hollow project. That was done, so that what he has left in his fund balance, he will be using to cover his overages. Once he completes all of his encumbrances as well, then we'll know where that fund balance finally ends up, and we'll be bringing that information back to you.
Again, no chance it'll be in the red.
Not in the red, no.
Any other questions on the financials? There being none, all those in favor of approving the financial report ending June 30th, 2021, please raise your hands. None, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. And moving on to transfers. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the transfers presented August 23rd, 2021.
Do I have a second? Nora?
Before you is a summary of the transfers. These pretty much follow the projection sheet as well. You can see where we had overage and where we came under budget on certain areas. And in the offsetting of all of that brings us back to that 35,000 that I had just spoken to before.
Overall large numbers. Anybody have questions about any transfers or transfers in general? Anything come up in the Budget and Finance Committee around these transfers that we should discuss? No?
I can just point out that we did go through the special ed overages. There was a lot of, well, less reimbursement than expected and more expenses than expected. And the technology transfer, that includes all the Chromebooks, not just, it's like everything all in. So that's a good thing to note. And that we did thank the team for going through a really ugly year with a lot of moving parts and coming out pretty much at par, which is not easy to do. I think that covers it, right?
Great, Sean. So that covers special ed technology. ECR, we know we didn't get what we expected. And
Food service, we knew was going to be over.
Exactly. All right. All those in favor of approving the transfers?
Jonathan, I think Kathleen had a question.
Oh, sorry. I didn't miss
Not a
you,
question,
Kathleen.
because I understand, I mean, the school lunch program, absolutely, I knew we were anticipating that. Is there a way going forward, since we're going to be, again, having the school lunch program available, which I agree with totally, to plan more prudently so that we don't have an overage? That's, and I don't expect an answer, but just thinking, you know, because it's a wonderful program, but it caused an overage. Or was that expected? I mean, and maybe I'm not a numbers person like many people.
Kathleen, the primary reason we had the overage this year was because of COVID. You might remember that we couldn't serve, for example, breakfast at the high school. And so unfortunately, we were not able to cover a great deal of the expenses that we would normally have. Normally, you wouldn't see an overage in food service. In fact, you'd probably see a surplus rather than. So this is truly unique to COVID. If it is unique to COVID again, which could happen, of course, we didn't budget any differently this year, because remember, we budgeted in October. And so it would perhaps look the same and we'd be in the same position this coming year. I'm hopeful that that's not the case. And Dawn has been working with the state for free lunches for our high school students as our K through 8 received this past year. So that's good news. Breakfast will be served to our high schoolers. So hopefully they'll take advantage of that. And I think we'll be in a better position, but there's no way to know for sure.
Right. And I have no question with the program. I was just thinking, I don't want to lose money on something that's so needed.
So if we have students in the building all year, we don't anticipate the same sort of an overage.
Right. That's another point, Jonathan, I neglected to mention is, remember, we didn't have all of our students in the building and there were times in which we didn't have any. So that's another variable that impacted the school lunch program. Again, optimistic at this point is that we're expecting students to be in all year, all of our students. And if that's the case, then we shouldn't have that issue.
Any other questions on transfers? There being none, all those in favor of approving the transfers presented August 23rd? 9, that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on, out of discussion items onto items of information. We'll go to the enrollment report first.
All right, Karen.
All right, thank you, Dr. De Silva. So you will see our projected numbers from Malone and Brune, who does our enrollment in November, and how we plan our budget. You will see our numbers from August 19th. So you'll see we were over by our projections. It is still too early to know how our school year will start. Particularly at the high school, you'll see a larger overage. Many times I've experienced over my tenure that a lot of parents don't withdraw before then. which is why October 1st will always be our official numbers. So we use this for planning purposes, particularly at the elementary level for the number of sections, how many we need. But you'll see right now we are in our registered students, 107 students over projection. Are there any questions about our enrollment right now?
So that's 50-ish over on the, excluding the 18 to 22 and outplaced, which we're not projected out.
Correct, because
and at RHS, that 27 tends to draw down slightly between now and
it
October
does.
1st.
It does. From my experience, parents at the high school level don't withdraw their students officially per se. So that's why we spend the first 5 days of the school year to determine who actually shows up. So that number will definitely change.
That
Sean?
said, and I believe everything that Karen has said, obviously she has the history. This would be one of those years that I would say, I don't know for sure how this is going to play itself out. We had a lot of kids leave for a variety of reasons last year. And so predictably, if we were to go back to the pattern that Karen described, you would see students transition out for those that haven't unregistered their kids or made different decisions during the summer about alternative programs for their children. But this would be an interesting year to see how it plays out, and even to the last minute once decisions are made from the State Department, et cetera, and plans are fleshed out.
Fair. Sean?
All right, I know we went through this at the last meeting, but I've had people ask again. The 18 to 22-year-old and the outplaced, there's nothing in the projected. There's something in the 8/19/21, which reads like these are all net new and we didn't know this was coming and oh my gosh, we're going to break the budget. Can you explain again for those that missed the last meeting what the projected was, if there was a number, because right now it looks like there wasn't a number.
Dr. Hanaway, do you want to speak to that?
I was going to let Karen jump in. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, let me jump in first. Then I'd love Dr. Hanaway to join me. So when we have our demographers are looking at who are Ridgefield residents and where are they zoned to be in school. So that's their purpose, is to look at who are the kids in Ridgefield that we are responsible for. Outside of that, programming can change where students go. So we can have preschoolers that weren't here. We can have kids outplaced. We have kids in other programs, but our demographer does not look at our programming or IEPs or whatever other services we provide. They're looking at the homes and where the kids should be. And then they do a trend. So that's how we budget, is from those trends for our classroom programmings. And then we are responsible, which we do. We look at our programming outside of demography, the demographer, to determine what we need to do to support our programs, such as pre-K, 18 to 21 outplacement. And that's where Dr. Hanaway does her assessment.
So for me, this is like an actual table issue, right? So the demographer doesn't collect projections, whereas for everything else in this column, they're demographer projections. So either I come 22 and the outplaced lines would be my projections, not the demographers. And then you would have a apples to apples rather than a 0 to not even 60, like 0 to 300 as it looks right now, which is not the case at all. Or we leave it as is, give you real numbers as of 8/19/21 and leave the demographer blank, because that's what the demographer did. They left those two blank. For me, the numbers of 18 to 22 and outplaced are within what we projected. We are like slightly lower in 18 to 22 than we projected, but not by a lot, because of student choices for their plans and their programming. But if in the board, and we can do what the board likes in terms of the formatting of this, but I just don't want to confuse the data here, that some data came from one source, and then if I add into these two cells, it's data coming from a different source.
Just a quick redirect. Here's how I would do it if it was my table, and it's not. I would put the 2020, 2021 figure in that field, so it's not blank, so we can compare at least some data to the new data.
Yeah, so this is where, Sean, we get into, we do it a lot, actual versus actual. So actual 2021 versus actual 21-22 versus projected 2021 to actual 21-22. So right now you're just seeing projected versus actual, not actual versus actual.
I get it, but we have no frame of reference for those two cells, but we do for everything else.
Can I add some? Well, first of all, as I understand it, this chart is for the benefit of the board. So technically, it is our chart. The second thing is you did project numbers for the 18 to 22 as well as the outplace when you did your budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
So those numbers would be very easily added in.
Yes.
And then those could also very easily have a little asterisk, a little note. These two numbers were generated by the district, not by the demographer.
Yeah.
And then this whole discussion is moot.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Maybe less, and here's where I'm misunderstanding. The 47 outplaced, are those 47 students that are shown in the projected column in the school that they would be in if they were not outplaced? Or are they net new 47 students?
It changes every day, right, Liz?
Yeah, it literally changes every week. It could change up to every week.
Yeah,
So
they could start at Branchville and go outplaced.
Right. So as of the date when this is created, these are, this is where these students are. And so they're not also counted because we have a different, in Power School, we changed their school. They're no longer attached to Branchville anymore. They're now attached to a different category. But that was as of August 19th. That could change as of August 28th. Or that's a Saturday, so August 30th.
I think I may have asked this question from Sean the last time in clarification. Are you asking for the 47 outplaced students, when we had those projected numbers at that moment in time, whatever that projected number came in, if those 47 were included there? Is that what you're asking?
If you're asking me, not really. I just wanted to know the bench, like Ken asked, what was the projection? If it's not the demographer, that's fine. But right now it reads they were 0 and now there's 10, and people look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, we're going to crush the budget." And I've had that question directly.
I'm happy to follow up at either a following board meeting or a subcommittee meeting with that specific information. It's very, very easy to collect. And then, however, what format the board prefers it in the future.
Just a very, very quick question. Does the administration see us currently as about 50 over projection or about 100 over projection?
I see us at the 107.
107 over projection.
That's right. That's
so that 47 is not buried in the.
Well, I see what you're saying. Is
the 57 would be buried in, so it'd be 50.
So Jonathan, 57, not 107.
Well, no, it'd be 50 because 57 are the over.
Yes.
And that's why October 1st are our numbers, because even right now, that's too premature to say, because it changes every day. And as I said, there's so much variation of people who have not put in their data yet, or our system has not been able to put in the data yet.
So for clarification, for the board's sake, how would you like us to provide that information? Do you want to know what our projected numbers are in versus where we are at any given time, and then keeping the outplaced students and the 18 to 22 in a separate chart?
It could all be kept in this chart. The numbers that we start with for our budgeting, the project is we use, for example, 1,532 for RHS. So we built our programming, our budgeting, everything around that number. So we did the same thing for 18 to 22 and outplaced. What were those numbers? They're just not in this chart. We know they're there. Dr. Hanaway just said she can easily get them. But if in the chart, we'll see them and we'll know that we projected 45. Now we have 47. October 1st, we have, 44.
So Ken and Sean, so originally when we presented data to the board, or anywhere we presented data, it was only K-12, because that's what the demographer does, and that's what you presented. And then over time, the board said, well, we fund other programs. So why aren't you presenting the enrollment on 18 to 21, outplacement, pre-K? So those lines got added, but they never jived with the demographer. So what you're highlighting is that disconnect. And it was an attempt to try to provide transparent information about what our actual enrollment was for programming, but not connected to projections. So I agree with Liz and your suggestion if we would put asterisks, but that's why it was never meant to be combined, but it got combined over time due to requests for full transparency of how many kids we're actually funding.
But the demographer doesn't suggest who's going to be outplaced. It just suggests
exactly. So he never did.
So my question is the 47 outplaced in this second column already shown in the demographer's first column, pointing to the schools that they would otherwise be attending?
Are they double counted, you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, from the projected, you're saying, from the demographer's projected, not from the actuals.
Yes.
Correct.
The 47 that are
already
outplaced
included in their regular
projected.
grade.
Yeah.
So that went back to Sean's point, it's really 50, or Jonathan's point, it's really 50 right now at this moment in time, whether it's October 1st or not, Karen, it's 50 over as opposed to 57.
So it's a good question with the demographer. So I don't know.
I've never asked him that specific question.
I have just one other point to put, particularly for the 18 to 22-year-olds. Since it's such a small cohort, I just worry about the identification ability.
That's correct, Kathleen.
Thank you.
And these numbers, even for the outplaced numbers, because as you're looking at 1 or 2 kids shifting, or 18 to 22, the outplaced could be K-12. So even though it's a small number, it could be across 13 grade levels. Whereas the 18 to 22 program is a very small cohort. And so when you see a number change in there year to year, right, it feels like that's a little bit more identifiable. And so I think we would need to caution ourselves. But as we're processing this out loud, I do wonder, and I think it's a question though, Karen, for the demographer, I could see the outplaced students being a part of those projected
projections.
But the 18 to 22, I'm not sure would be. And so the outplaced, there are students. So despite the fact, going back to the responsibility of what the demographer is and what our responsibility is to educate every child that lives in Ridgefield, the outplaced population, if they're not double dipping into the 18 to 22, which they're not, would be a part of those projections, where the 18 to 22 program, would, although associated with the high school, in reality, I think would be separate. But that's a good question for the demographer. And I think we ask that first, and then we come back and see how the board wants that information when we know the answer to that question.
Dr. De Silva, that's how I'm reading it. That those 47 are part of the projected.
Of the 9 schools, whereas I'm not sure that 18 to 22.
I don't believe that they are, because they are considered done with high school credits.
The 10.
Just one last point. Given that this group, the 10 and the 47, drove about a $900,000 hole in the budget for last year, I think that's why we need to get our arms around what was expected and what's not expected. Just to make sure.
Sorry. I don't know that I don't know that it's a one for one, that those outplaced students led to that amount of money solely, because
no, that's not the intention to even state that. That program drove a large hole in the budget due to ECR reimbursements that didn't come in. You know, it's not a district driven problem, but it's one that we need to get underneath and understand the dynamic. And we can't do that if we're flying blind on the most rudimentary of stats.
Okay, so I think what's fair to do after this meeting is we're going to get a hold of understanding where those two populations fit into the projections, if they do at all. And then the second question that we have for ourselves is to find a way in which to communicate this so that it's clear for the board and for the public that are looking at these numbers and how they impact what we're projecting for our budget, and then subsequently what's actual. Does that make sense?
Makes great sense.
We'll do that before our next enrollment update.
Thank you.
Of course.
We'll move on to the staffing report.
Okay, so every month we show you the staffing ins and outs, the resignations, retirements we've received, and the new hires per category. So the summer is always a busy time. So let me know if there's any questions, because you'll see lots of changes.
A lot of new hires tomorrow.
Every day.
True.
Have we heard anything about potential of teachers choosing to resign over the new vaccine mandates?
We have, over the new vaccine mandates, I think we've had one faculty member express concern, and whether or not it's a direct line between the vaccine mandate and resignation, I think is still a little bit fuzzy, but it looks like we have at least one.
Any questions on the staffing report? Okay, we can move on to correspondence, starting with public comment.
First public comment this evening is from Erica Somir, 49 Soundview Road. Thank you to all that made the Buddy program possible this summer. I hope the opportunities like these continue throughout the school year and RPS's future. Relationships between these students is so crucial and meaningful to help understand one another in this ever-changing world. Next public comment is Danielle DeBene, 72 Hobby Drive. Throughout the school year, when COVID cases occur and you send emails to inform about the cases, in addition to advising about the specific school and classroom, could you also advise if the person was vaccinated, if applicable, due to age? Thank you. Next public comment, Harry Knott, 1 Stebbins Close. Dear Board of Education, per the edsite.connecticut.gov website, since 2018, the number of students identified with disabilities at Veterans Park School has significantly decreased. The percentage of those students identified has decreased from 13.4% to 9.9%. The district average is 14.7%, which is still below the state average of 16%. As you may know, the school and the district have a responsibility to identify students with disabilities so that they may receive the direct instruction that they require. Child find laws exist and are taken seriously by the State of Connecticut Department of Education. Why has Veterans Park identification rates declined? Thanks for your time and consideration. Next public comment, Erica Somir, 49 on Soundview Road. With the high interest in American Sign Language during Bridge, would RPS ever consider adding this as an option in middle and high school to fulfill the foreign language requirement? This would be beneficial for students, especially those who struggle to learn another language. Next public comment, Danielle DeBene, 72 Hobby Drive. In light of the recent statement from the CDC director yesterday that the vaccine efficacy is waning and the evidence is demonstrating that the vaccinated are getting sick with COVID at higher rates, see Israel and England, will the school fight back against the mandates for staff to be vaccinated? It's obvious that ultimately the students will be forced to comply with the vaccine mandate as well. Or is the school beholden to what the state says, regardless if it makes sense? Thank you. Last public comment is the Elwart family, 46 Soundview Road. Since vaccinated individuals can acquire and transmit COVID-19, why wouldn't vaccinated individuals be required to be tested weekly, especially since many may be asymptomatic? Okay, that's all of the public comment. Our correspondence report. As of 6 p.m. this evening, we have received 17 emails since our last regular Board of Education meeting. 10 emails provided feedback on the RPS Safe Return Plan. 1 email regarded the results of our recent survey. 4 emails were operational in nature. 1 email regarded curriculum, and 1 email regarded vaccine guidance. That's it.
Thank you, Rachel. We have reached the end of the agenda for this evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Ken moves. Do I have a second? Sean. All those in favor?